Right, I was just sat there and realised I've never actually gone through my kind of console collection and console history. So let's do that. First console I ever owned was the N64, and that is a hell of a start to make. Games like Banjo Kazooie, GoldenEye, Lego Races, Mario Kart 64, Super Mario 64, WWF No Mercy, it was incredible. But you then end up moving on to the PS2, which I don't really remember all that well. A lot of people have a real soft spot for the PS2, but I just never really sat down and used it all that much. Not because I didn't want to, I just didn't have it for long, never really got the games, and hindsight's a hell of a thing, but never got to it really. But then it was the Game Boy Advance, and I remember sitting there playing through the old Mario games that had been ported over to the Game Boy Advance, and it was incredible. But that's where we move over to the Xbox Original. Still to this day, one of my favourite consoles of all time. I'm not necessarily going for it, but if there was a console I was going to sit down and try and get a complete collection for, it would be the Xbox Original. It is still insanely impressive, just purely how powerful that system was for the time. Yes, the first generation model has some issues, but the fact that it had a hard drive for the time was insane. I remember downloading all my old CDs straight to the console and playing them like that. I still don't know how that was legal, but apparently it was. That's when we moved to the Xbox 360. Now, I was very unlucky with my 360s. I had free Red Ring on me before I finally moved up to the kind of one of the more kind of competent Jasper boards. I think it was the Jasper boards that were okay. I'm not 100%, but that's when I finally moved over there. Then that one ended up dying. Don't remember how. I think it might have been a dodgy disk drive, but then we went straight to the Slim and things have been perfect since. Still got the box and everything. But it took me ages to move on from the 360. I didn't move on until 2017, at which point I bought an Xbox One S, and it's still one of my favourite consoles of all time. But it's still, to this day, one of my favourite consoles of all time. It was a massive improvement on the original Xbox One. It was so much faster, so much quieter, and I didn't have a single issue the entire time I was using it. Honestly, not one. But that's when I moved over to the Series S. And I loved it, it was really quick, but I hated not being able to play physical media. I couldn't stand it. So, about 6 months ago, I made a decision. I didn't have the money to put into an Xbox Series X, and I didn't really think any of the newer models were really worth it value wise anyway. Because you look at the platform as a whole, and there's still not many games I genuinely consider worth buying that system for. To this day, almost 5 years after the current generation came out, there's still very few games just launching for the next gen. Almost everything's coming onto the previous generation, and the only game that's come out that I truly care about is Assassin's Creed Shadows, and that's still not even out yet. And even then, there's a good chance it's kind of bad by the way it's looking. I mean, I'd like to play games like The Stalker 2, but just it's not enough for me to buy a console for, you know? But that's when I made the decision to go backwards to the Xbox One X, and I'm so glad I did. Games often end up looking better on the One X than they do on the Series S. Like, sure, it's not going to beat out the Series X, not a chance, but compared to the Series S, they look better quite a lot of the time. Because the Series S aims for 1440p, that's its big step up. The One X pushes for 4K every time. Yeah, sure, you might have some extra frame drops here and there because technically speaking it's less powerful, but you look at the specs and you wouldn't be able to tell. But that's when I started going backwards again. I ended up finally getting a hold of the PS1. Haven't really used it to be honest. The only thing I really bought it for, because I could get a PlayStation 1 for like 25 quid these days, they're not rare. I bought it just because I found a cheap copy of The Simpsons Wrestling and it was just funny. Now, I had a Wii as a kid that I played a lot, but I didn't have my own one. So I went back and grabbed a Wii as soon as I had money for myself, immediately. And of course, you know it's homebrewed, let's be honest. I'm a collector, but I'm a reasonable collector. I'm not spending 20 quid on Mario Kart from 10 years ago, let's be honest. Just realised it's not even 10 years ago, it's what? Almost 20 now. That's uncomfortable numbers. And of course, we eventually grabbed a Switch. You'll have to ignore the state of it a little. It was a family Switch, which meant my brother used it, and he was like 7 when we bought it, so that went about as well as expected. I had a Switch OLED for myself for a while, but there just wasn't enough games to warrant keeping it. It was so expensive, and I sold it on for like 250 quid. It was just like, I'd much rather just have the cash and buy more games. You know what I mean? Yes, it's a good platform, but it's got the same problem that every Nintendo platform has. It's just hideously underpowered. The last time that it was actually comparable on a power level was, what, the N64 era? That's only because it came out 2 years later than the PlayStation, and had expansion packs. Since then, they've been underpowered, and the only reason they've done well is because mostly Nintendo have used that hardware well, but you take away the actual big console sellers and you're left with a pile of 10-year-old ports, really. It just feels like another excuse to release Skyrim on something, you know what I mean? And even now, it's like the Wii era. Everything that comes out is either missing features, looks a lot worse, or runs a lot worse. But anyway, this has been a giant rant, so I'll leave it there for now. Let me know what your first console was. I'm curious where people started. And I'll see you in the next one. Drop us a follow.